Hello and welcome to Cloud Insiders, the podcast that brings cloud down to earth. Hello and welcome to Cloud Insiders. This episode we're talking about large-scale transformations and we're joined by two of Xtravirt's own, Craig Whelan and Andy Hine.
Thanks, Sam.
Andy, can we start with a quick introduction from yourself? Who you are, what you do?
Yeah, so I am a technical pre-sales consultant with Xtravirt. I've been with Xtravirt for just over 2 years. Before that, I've probably got about 15 years worth of experience in IT, mainly in infrastructure and workspace focused roles. And obviously been through quite a few transformations during that time. So hopefully can add some value to this discussion.
Excellent. And Craig, who are you?
Hi, so I'm operations manager at Xtravirt and I've been with the business now for around 7 years. Prior to that, I have a kind of history of technical roles from small to large scale transformational and operations and systems management type situations and sysadmin. So kind of have been in the depths of it all, and then through career progression worked into project management roles, and now to where I sit within Xtravirt overseeing a number of projects in delivery of this type of activity.
Excellent. So what is meant by the term large-scale transformation? Craig?
That's a good question, Sam. So in my view, large is only really relative to the organisation and is about how much of the kind of activity touches various parts of a business. So me, transformational activity typically affects or involves all of the business with respect to large, and in specific respect to IT projects is around providing tools and systems or solutions that benefit the entire business and its key objectives as a whole.
And can you give us some examples of a large-scale transformation tool?
I can. So EUC, or end user computing, as an example, provides multiple ways of access for users to their data and applications, and it's quite a departure from traditional mechanisms for provisioning of desktops and access to kind of the day-to-day running from a user perspective. If we refer back to kind of where mainframe was back in the 70s and 80s, the user was fixed in one location regardless of where that data was held or the systems that ran. They had a desktop and that was kind of it. Now, obviously, with business being so agile, it's about having any device, any application, anywhere, and that's to kind of coin one of the marketing phrases out there in the industry. This provides, a huge amount of flexibility and working practices for businesses. So, that's large scale. It does touch all aspects of business.
That's great. And Andy, what examples have you seen of a large scale transformation?
So yeah, just following up on Craig's point around end user compute, that's where a lot of my transformational activity has kind of been focused. It is quite a change. It's a change which, as Craig mentioned, touches all parts of the business. So the users are working in a new and agile and dynamic way. The infrastructure needs to be centralized in order to support that in terms of services and data. And the business needs to change their attitude towards their user workspace really and buy into it for it to be a success.
That's good. So what kind of things are driving organisations to undertake these kind of transformations, and what do they kind of hope to achieve from these?
Well, ultimately the IT services and infrastructure is supporting the business and enabling the business. So it's really responding to what the business is doing. So it could be a change in their market conditions, it could be a change in their strategy, it could be mergers and acquisitions, or a new way of working really. So it's really driven by what the business is doing, and as with a lot of IT projects and a lot of business projects, underpinned by cost and saving money and increasing productivity where possible.
Of course, yeah. So Craig, have you seen any other sort of reasons for an organisation to undertake these transformations at all?
I have, yeah, and just taking some of the key ones there quite crucially, and in conjunction with that, it's about providing a better customer experience more often than not, or providing their product to a customer in a more efficient manner, and in doing so realizing internal efficiencies to make the margin increase for the product that's being sold ultimately. And the phrase that's overused within many industries is doing more with less. The reality of that isn't necessarily true, but acknowledging you're getting more with maybe the same and providing greater flexibility is probably a better representation of what you achieve with a transformational project.
So coming from your operations background, Craig, what are the things that are involved in undertaking a project of the large scale?
So the one objective, first and foremost, is being clear about what you're trying to achieve with that program activity. Those key steps are about providing a framework effectively to work within that provides some flexibility, not necessarily trying to solution everything up front, but let's be clear about what the business is trying to achieve, which we previously just touched on there. Following on from that, expectation setting, that manifest effectively allows for everybody to understand what is going to be achieved from the project, and the communication of that is critical, that everybody knows and everybody's on board with the plan of action. Deviation from the plan is fine. That's general project and program management, and transformational activity is quite flexible or quite fraught with a certain amount of change. But as long as you've got a key view of those objectives, then you can maintain the focus long term in that respect. And long term is one of those things that's subjective effectively to the activity itself, and typically you will see these projects be 6, 12, 18 months, if not longer, maybe 5 years for these kind of transformations to take place.
Okay, so normally sort of over long periods of time with a lot of planning involved. Andy, have
Certainly,
you seen anything?
yep.
Have you seen anything different from a pre-sales point of view when it comes to sort of starting one of these projects?
No, I think what's becoming more and more clear is that the work up front before a transformation, in terms of the requirements gathering and the discovery and any expectation setting of what is actually going to be achieved by the transformation, is really, really important before you set off on your transformational journey, really.
Cool, thank you. So what tools can we use then? Is there anything to help manage and ensure successful transformations of this size? And if so, what tools are they? I think if we could, Andy, come to you first.
Yeah, there are a number of different tools depending on the type of transformation that you're doing. So transformational activity that I've seen going back a few years was when the kind of virtualization came into play. Moving from a physical estate to a virtual estate, obviously there's tool sets that you need to deploy to help you do that and manage that process. Again, around the EUC space, that discovery and assessment piece, there's tools that help you do that. In terms of managing the transformation, I don't think there are tools that would compare to good old-fashioned kind of project management. Obviously, the Microsoft Office suite has got kind of project, those kind of tool sets. So yeah, it's a good project management, good communication.
Quite a bit of discovery beforehand as well, just to make it a bit smoother, I guess. Craig, what about from your point of view, what tools can people use to help?
Yeah, I think again, Andy's hit on two really key areas. One is the technical landscape and the discovery tools used, and they're varied. You can pick up from major players or kind of niche product sets for discovery. In terms of project management, which is my later years of my career have been focused, the traditional management tools in providing Gantt charts and task list, those are key aspects. And one thing not to focus on too much is the detail early on, but certainly have a broad reach of kind of key milestones looking to be achieved. In terms of managing at a project or task level, for me personally, nothing beats post-it notes on a wall or the digital versions of kind of what is Kanban effectively, and those kind of flexible management approaches that provide a visual tool for completing work and the kind of tasks ahead. And even if they're only kind of high level, they give very clear indication of there's a movement of activity. The granularity of Gantt charts, as Andy said, in terms of what's provided within, say, Microsoft Project or alternative tools such as that, is very helpful because it allows you to plan a certain number of events and sequence them effectively and provide a knock-on impact where there may be delays. That's really good for reporting upwards. Not so much down to a task level, but certainly where key milestones may slip. That's always been quite a key thing for me. The other part and the tool suites effectively would be analytics. Transformation of any kind of state requires an understanding of what you've got now in its current form. Analytics software allows you to take that, and we kind of briefly touched on the technical tooling, to understand what works, how it works, who it works for, and gives business analysts something to grasp hold of and unpick the web of connections that make up not only the technical story but also the human story involved in transformational activity. That's key for me and feeds into everything that you would do within a transformational program of work.
Cool. So in a typical engagement that Xtravirt undertakes, would that data be expected to be sort of in place already, or is that something that Xtravirt can help with gathering and working out how to approach a large-scale transformation?
No, that's absolutely something we'd help with. A lot of our work, we necessarily wouldn't engage in the discussions further down the line. We'd always bring it back to this discovery piece, which Anders mentioned already, and uncovering, should I say, that technical landscape is what we're about. We've developed methodologies with either tool sets or indeed conversational sequencing and journeys to identify exactly how solutions work in their current state and map them to their digital form. Andy hit upon earlier kind of, traditional data center type activity where you'd virtualize systems. Well, where people are coming from the old school of physical hardware, you still need to have those kind of conversation as to how something was put together in its physical form and whether it maps to a virtual instance of that itself. And the technical tools allow you to discover quite quickly what might be in the data center that you can't physically see up front. So absolutely, it's what we're kind of here for, and it's the first steps we take in every project of this type of nature.
Excellent. So, and if we come back to you, so obviously you mentioned the discovery piece originally. What sort of tasks do the discovery and assessments cover, and what data can someone expect on the other side?
You'd need to start with data gathering, so that could be inventories of key systems. You would map out their dependencies and their interconnections and kind of paint a picture really for the organisation of what they've got. Visibility is always the first thing that people are usually missing or usually benefit from. So it would be really compiling all that information and any outputs from workshop-led activities and with kind of key stakeholders, compile that information into a usable, readable report, present that back to the business, as well as any complementing toolset outputs. So again, going back to something like an EUC project, you can present back application lists that have been discovered, versionings of applications, metrics around how much resource your business needs and things like that. So again, slightly tailored depending on what the project is, but you always start with the information gathering and play that back.
Excellent. So Craig, if we start with you on this next one, what common mistakes have you seen from organisations when undertaking projects of this scale?
So one of the key things, I think is common with any project, to be fair, not necessarily just large-scale transformation type effort, is around communication. The realistic nature of communication means that generally you've got an audience that's quite wide in terms of requirements, and you may end up sending one message in multiple different formats or to multiple audience in different formats. And one of the key mistakes is to assume that your message is being read and understood. And, for me, communication is about engagement and knowing that the message read is the one that you've conveyed. So that's a common element that I'd refer back to as being a mistake, if you will, in inverted commas. And it's just taking that approach and that style needs to be tailored based on your audience and understand that audience. Typically, there's an underestimation as to how much time might be required in a program of activity in transformational change. These things uncover through the analytics, through the kind of interviewing of those stakeholders, uncover a number of truths that take time to resolve if they're going to be changed. They may not work the way that people expect it to through organic growth and change over time. That elongates the project more often than not. It's difficult to pin down a kind of ballpark how much longer a project typically takes, but just to be aware that the likelihood is it will be longer than you ever expected it to be. The other common things would be knowing or having the right mix of subject matter experts, both in-house and external to your organisation. Getting hold of those people and keeping hold of those people is key to a smoother, successful project, shall we say. Those internal to you, they've been embedded into these applications, into these solutions and systems and the way that your business works. They know it like nobody else. So ensuring they're with you and working in the same direction as to the key objectives that we identified at the beginning of the conversation is going to be pivotal to the success of moving that project in a full momentum. Additionally, external suppliers and consultants are very key in terms of their experience of this type of activity. Your organisation does whatever it is you do well. The external organisations such as Xtravirt we do this well because we've a number of years of experience or a number of projects of experience in this particular space. That's where external suppliers are also pivotal to the success of these projects, and hence why we're almost having this conversation, as we can advise that, we've got this experience, this is a well-trodden path for us, and we know, how to duck and dive some of these issues that may come up, or at least be aware that they are coming, and how we may best tackle them.
That's perfect. Thank you, Craig. Andy, from a pre-sales point of view, what sort of mistakes do organisations make?
I would say transformation for the sake of transformation, if that makes sense. So again, VDI was a classic one when it came on the scene. A lot of IT directors had a VDI want without really understanding what that really meant, and a lot of the time it didn't actually give them what they thought they were going to get. The equivalent in this day and age is probably cloud and software as a service or infrastructure as a service and things like that. There are a lot of buzzwords within the industry and turn a lot of heads, and people can think they want to do something when actually they might not need to, or the use case might be slightly different and not work for their organisation.
Yeah, certainly. The other thing as well is being prepared for post-transformational activity. One of the things that's quite easy to do is get swept up in the change itself. Transformational activity, certainly from where I stand, is quite an exciting thing to be involved in. And for an organisation, it's all too easy to get lost in that melee of activity and forget that actually once the project ends, and inevitably it will do, is that you have to look after these solutions that you've put in place. So keeping an eye on the fact that you need to make sure the right BAU structure is operationally ready to take on these new solutions is one thing that does crop up from time to time, and is certainly something I'd like to make those looking at transformational activity aware of ahead of getting involved in this kind of work.
Cool. So this question kind of ties into the previous, but are there any downsides to a large-scale transformation? I think, Andy, if we start with you and maybe focus on the sort of the whole transforming for the sake of transforming, the whole VDI example. What are some of the downsides, if any?
The downside with any transformation is it's a disruption to normal service, so it'll be a business disrupting activity. The downsides to things like VDI, for example, could be that end users don't really like change, and again, that's a disruption for them. And it may be that with a centralised environment, there's a lot more control, and users no longer feel that they can do as much with their devices anymore. It's really important to get the first impression right in an EUC transformation, because it's really hard to reverse that if the users see that it's taking longer for them to log on, for example. Even if you correct that in the future, the first impression is going to be that the new system is not as good as the old system. So I've seen that quite a lot.
So it comes back to the whole discovery and assessment phases that we spoke about earlier, isn't it? Getting the right data, right information, and then planning properly for...
Yeah, exactly. Classic example with EUC is things like data manipulation. So I've seen where an organisation has centralised everything in readiness for EUC, and there's a team of people that use a file server which is at the other end of the country that no one had found out during that discovery process, and pulling down it was a finance team pulling down large Excel files over the wide area network is obviously killing their session and producing a really bad user experience. So that's a classic example of where the discovery process needed to be tighter. So yes, it's totally linked to that.
Excellent. Craig, what downsides have you seen, if any?
Oh, if any, they're always some, unfortunately, Sam. So I think one of the things that Andy touched on there, and it's, I suppose, EUC kind of, the way that this kind of activity works is that generally you're going to be interacting with people, and the human element of transformational change cannot be underestimated, and that it's disruptive. And people don't like change in general. They're quite happy with the way they were working. It worked before. Why am I changing it? And they may not know and be on board with what you're trying to do. And Andy said, refer back to those earlier stages and those kind of drivers as to what you're trying to achieve. As long as they're communicated correctly, you kind of try and overcome most of that challenge. But that's quite a difficult one. And the other thing for me is, again, this human element is understanding the fact that you may have to lose or let go of people that you value technically and personally. they may not share your vision, or their own role may change into something they don't aspire to. You are changing your business for the better for you, whether you're a managing director or whether you're just a head of function. That change is about making that business perform better. The individual may not subscribe to that specifically, or it may just not fit their own agenda effectively. So, the downside is that you will have to say goodbye to people that you know, love and trust in your business. Now, that might be, to other business departments, depending on the scale of your work, or it might be that they leave the organisation entirely. So something to be aware of, certainly, and try and mitigate as best you can. And I think that's done with good communication, and that's in a two-way fashion.
Perfect. So what do you think the future holds then in terms of large-scale projects? Is it going to remain large-scale, or it will be sort of small and many?
There'll always be large-scale, and I think if we refer back to my personal definition of large-scale, where it affects all parts of the business, I think that will always be the case. However, I think what we might see in business is the kind of agility that a lot of businesses now start up with means that the kind of momentum of large-scale transformation is a lot quicker. People will be more in tune with the idea that change is a normal part of going through the growth or contraction of business life cycle. However, there isn't anything to say that even these kind of startups and these very agile businesses won't have their own baggage along the way. Naturally, there will be acquisition of other businesses or teams, and that in itself will create large-scale transformational activity that needs to realise efficiencies. Two departments may not be required, so therefore let's move into one, and what does that look like in terms of transformation? So it will always be there, and I think it will just change in the way that it looks at the moment. I think it might actually be more efficient, and it might be seen as more routine rather than the kind of shock, if you will, of a large scale transformation we've seen in the last sort of decade or so.
Andy, from a pre-sales point of view, do you agree, or do you see that changing to some extent?
I think a little bit of both. I think as organisations have become more and more reliant on their IT systems to not only support the business but actually enable new business ways of working and new avenues of commerce and that kind of thing, they've become a lot more aware of the systems and a lot more kind of risk averse. And as such, kind of cloud's a good example. The businesses that are looking at it by siloing their bits of IT to find the least disruptive use cases first as a kind of foot in the door. So things like test and dev is a good one. DR, as we've seen as well, with a number of opportunities to gain that confidence and then kind of land and expand that transformation. So I think a bit of both. There will always be large-scale transformations. So businesses looking at kind of rationalising their processes. So something like a rollout of SAP or something like that would be a good example, because whilst it may be one application, it's going to touch all areas of your business from procurement to finance to everything. That involves large-scale transformation, and as we said right at the start, large-scale is relative to the business. So one business may see large-scale as something different, but it's relative to how much disruption and how much change it's going to bring to your business.
Perfect. Thank you, guys. So that's it really in terms of the questions. Before we close off, have you got any sort of additional comments or suggestions around large-scale transformations?
Yeah, one thing for me actually, Sam, is something that Andy touched on earlier, and it's the kind of collateral that comes out of the discovery phases, and it's understanding that might actually have additional value. Even if an organisation enters into transformational activity and goes through a discovery phase, all is not lost if they decide to kind of close the door on that work for now. There's a lot that's understood from that activity that the customer may not know at that point in time. How these systems work, how they've evolved, may not reflect the current documentation or understanding that they've got. And that is value that is seen as value add. Its primary purpose is in respect of transformation is to aid that activity. But the upshot is that there is a much better understanding of what that looks like right now. And some of that post-transformation is still useful because you'll naturally manipulate that knowledge and understanding into post-transformational BAU knowledge, databases and knowledge bases and bits and pieces like that feed into things like CMDB systems and the like. But if you were to call a day on the project at the first hurdle, then what have you come away with? Actually a better understanding of what you look like at the moment, which is a good thing without any shadow of a doubt.
Excellent. Andy, any additionals from you?
No, I guess one thing to mention would be during a transformation, don't be kind of afraid to stop the transformation or change the journey of it. Things are moving really, really quickly, and there's no point continuing down a route if it's no longer suitable and fits the business requirements. So yeah, don't be scared to alter the journey.
Excellent, thank you. Thanks, guys. That's us done. Thank you for your time today, and thank you for joining.
Thanks, Sam.
Thanks, Sam.
Thank you for listening to this episode. Find out more and listen to additional episodes on Cloud Insiders FM. Follow us on Twitter @Cloud Insiders and subscribe on iTunes. See you soon.